Your life.
Hey everyone, welcome to another community forum. Today, we're going to continue to respond to some questions that we've seen on our Discord. And we found one question that's kind of uh, highly relevant to this community forum that I thought we could entertain for some time. So this is a question by McDougan Bagel, who's a somewhat recent contributor to our Discord. I don't know anything about this person really, besides their penchant for bagels or their like for bagels. They say, who is the target audience of our Discord? Is it meant to be open to everyone regardless of knowledge level? Um, bu- 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 um, is it intended to experiment with communicating science to a broad range of people? More engagement and detailed discussion of the fundamental concepts would be helpful. So this is good feedback, and I think it's an important question, one that we can kind of discuss. I mean, and not just, we can all discuss it. Um, I'm not sure. I mean, we can discuss whether or not there ultimately is a target audience. I mean, I think the first thing to say, though, as a general policy, is it's not intended to be exclusive to any particular knowledge group. It's intended to be generally open. So we can begin with that general statement, though I think as we've discussed somewhat privately, it's one thing to just make that statement and say, well, this is not intended to be for scientists, not necessarily intended for researchers, and intended for anyone who has an interest in the work that we do. I think it's easy to kind of say that. Um, but to actually engage with the community in a way that is helpful and is enjoyable for all sides involved and is inclusive, I think is another thing. And to be candid, I think that we haven't actually been successful in really doing that yet. Um, I don't really know of any, and if people have examples of successful case studies, I'd be happy to hear about them. But I actually think it's somewhat hard to do this. And so, I mean, I'm quite interested in hearing from people who watch the streams, who are on Discord, you know, things that we can do that they would actually find to be helpful. Because ultimately, we're a nonprofit. The goal is to work for the general public benefit. And so, we're happy to engage. We're happy to help. So, um, yeah. So in principle, yeah, it's open. We're not going to discriminate based on level of experience, et cetera, et cetera. We're happy to receive questions from anyone. Um, However, I think that um, doing that and building a community around it is not as easy as one might think. So, like, I mean, we can kind of discuss some of the problems we ourselves encounter. So, like, I don't know. Like, one thing is, of course, we're scientists and we'd love to nerd out with other scientists. We're working on research that's rather technical, and we'd love to receive questions from people that are asking somewhat specific questions about the things that we're working on, like asking us specific things about hypermatrices, asking us specific questions about moduli spaces, asking us specific questions about L functions, asking us specific questions about the functionality that Nick is building, et cetera, et cetera. We usually don't get highly technical questions. We usually don't get questions that address specific details of the work that we're doing. And personally, I find that that's one form of engagement that I'd like to have that currently we don't have. We get many questions. To be candid, we get many questions that are kind of questions about ideas that Stephen has had. They're questions that probably could perfectly well be asked during live streams that Stephen gives. And again, we're happy to help people. We're happy to answer people's questions. But I think that's kind of my key source of I don't want to say distress, but it's a kind of a concern that I have, which is we want to find a way to engage with people. People aren't really engaging with us about the specificities of our research. I think the only way that we would be able to do that is if we invited more people who are basically working on those areas to the Discord. Like we're going to have a hypermatrix colloquium soon. And if those people, those attendees are on our Discord, then we can start chatting about hypermatrices, but it'll be quite technical in nature. Likewise, we could do this with other research projects that we're working on. I suppose there's some ideal where you have professors, you have researchers, you have general enthusiasts, and there's some sort of a common cordial etiquette where, you know, specialists can ask rather technical questions and have technical discussions, and they're free to do so. Um, People who are interested in learning more, who are general followers or people who are hoping to educate themselves or explore their interests are free to ask more elementary or even naive questions without feeling as though they're being judged. There's some way to foster a culture like this. I don't think we've fostered it quite yet. That's kind of my assessment, but I'm very interested in what you guys think about kind of like what you'd like to get out of engagement with the community, if you think we've succeeded or not, and what the ideal would be. That's kind of my ideal, is like obviously we're gonna have people like my presumption is like we're gonna have people at different experience levels. The people who are experts are gonna ask questions about specific topics. People who are um, coming in without extensive experience are gonna ask questions about um, kind of more general matters, even things that don't necessarily pertain to math or science directly. And I don't necessarily think there's going to be strong communication between these different sectors. But I'd like to find a way in which we can interact with kind of basically anyone. And people who kind of people will probably form like cliques and they would kind of talk to each other. And that's kind of normal. And so long as we can communicate with these different kind of cliques of sectors of people and there's a kind of mutual respect, I think I would, that's the kind of thing I would enjoy. What do you guys think?
Processing.
Yannick, go ahead.
No, I don't have too much particular ideas how we can improve the experience in our Discord server. Maybe like some add some common activities, like maybe make a book club or something like I don't know, maybe some common topics to discuss unrelated to our research, so that they maybe or maybe distantly related somehow. Just interesting scientific topics that can be discussed about. I don't know.
I mean, I have a few
Yeah,
thoughts, but I want to give the chance for everyone to say their piece.
Yeah, James, you always give this elaborate, well thought answer and then ask people else to add.
sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I don't know, I would really like to hang out on Discord, let's say, with people who are like interested in what we do. Like general audience too, but like my own my own selfish point of view is explaining your research to someone that is like know a little who knows a little bit of math but is not a mathematician. It is really like help you understand what you really do. Yeah, so if someone has any questions about Langlands, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, not to Carlos, if you don't mind, I just want to say,
Sure,
I
yeah.
mean, to Nick's point, we don't really intervene or participate in the Discord that much. Like it's usually kind of reactive. Like someone will ask a question, we'll respond, someone will join, we'll
Yeah,
welcome them, someone will start a conversation. But we haven't really tried to steer it that much. We could try and find examples of articles, books that pertain to things that we're interested in, but are also like we could tell someone like, hey, here's a talk like Wukash, even in your case, right? Like there are certain talks like you could take Richard Taylor's uh talk that's basically about like modular arithmetic and reciprocity laws, even explaining basic things like taking solutions modulo p for different polynomial equations. Like we could introduce like somewhat introductory materials that we ourselves find useful and say, hey, if you're interested in this thing that we're working on, here's like a pretty kind of low rung that you could try and jump and reach. And if you want to climb on someone's shoulders or something, we can help raise you up, and you can actually start climbing this ladder with us if you're interested. So like I think like we could certainly do more to like to welcome people. Like, okay, we're working on this thing, and if you join one of our live streams, we're in the weeds. We're discussing the minutia of some rather, for other people, some rather abstruse point about Hecke operators or something. But if you're interested in this generally, we could share, like, Quanta Magazine has had a pretty elementary piece on Langlands. We haven't really shared any of that, so we could certainly do that. We could do, and we could also, to Nick's point, just find examples of things that are happening, recent discoveries, books. We can ask people topics. Like, we could certainly do more to just kind of curate and organize discussion. We could certainly do that. We probably should do that. And yeah, and to Łukasz's point, like basically, I think we probably, I will say, like, one reservation I have at the moment is the conversations right now on Discord are pretty informal. They're pretty informal, and they don't pertain into our research that much. And so I'm kind of, I have to admit, somewhat hesitant to reach out to like some of our technical colleagues and ask them to follow the Discord, because I imagine they'll kind of just follow the Discord, and then they'll just be another person sitting on our list of Discord people, but they're not going to participate because there's no real, like, there's no obvious entrance that we've created. So I think if we take both Łukasz and Nick, if we take what they say into account, we could do more to try and facilitate, kind of try and see if we can create conversations around our own research. We probably have to do it ourselves. I think we've kind of presumed, or at least I've presumed, and it's been a stupid thing to presume, that we can kind of just have these streams and work on things, and people are going to watch and ask us questions. And they haven't. They just ask us questions about things, ideas that precede the Institute, some of them that we're working on directly, some of them that we're not even working on directly at all. And it just kind of tells me, like, okay, people don't really understand what we're working on, and they're asking questions about things that they know something else about. And that's kind of frustrating for us. And maybe it's frustrating for other people too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the uses that I've always seen for Discord is this melting pot of ideas that it's rare. I think it's kind of a new invention in some sense. I mean, it was not common that you have a kind of research institution or some kind of organization, and they will have a community attached that is other than whoever is in their newsletter or something like that, right? And I think that I ascribe everything you've said, create, more active participation, like book clubs and, discussion groups and things like that. So I am all for being more organized in that respect. But I think that something that I've suggested a few times in the past as well has been to maybe bring the community a bit more to the fore in maybe community fora or something like that. So we could have actually people, like they submit questions, or they make a well-posed comment or discussion topic, and then we actually invite them over, and there's maybe like 20 minutes to discuss this topic, and they appear here on the Zoom call, and they say hi, and they present their thing, obviously if they want to, right? So it's having this sort of time and space open for people to join, because at the end of the day, Discord is kind of a simulation of something that I think is quite a nice ideal to work towards, which is this delocalized community that you can funnel through this kind of user interfaces. And I think if we double it with something like Zoom calls and more sort of structured interactions, I think that makes quite a big difference. I mean, it's something that I have been thinking for a long time in other contexts, in helping set up this basics research society in Europe with physicists, in my own society. I mean, in different contexts, we have, I mean, essentially toyed with this idea, and for a long time, especially before COVID, it was kind of artificial to kind of push in that direction. But since COVID, this is sort of second nature, and yeah. So I think that the one concrete proposal I would have is that we make active members or interested members of the community more real time involved somehow, right? So try to maybe split one half of the community forum for staff members to discuss, and maybe the other half for people to join and more casually converse, or maybe have like a more official part, and then we have a sort of a tail which is a bit more informal. They can maybe even go offline or whatever, and something like that. I think it will, because I mean, there's clearly people, I mean, they're probably watching, or they will watch the live stream. So if you're listening, I mean, do feel the reference. But I think there's people who are quite active and who are quite interested in continuing to engage with our ideas and are constantly sort of following and asking questions and so on. So I think it'll be nice to get to know these people and progressively make the interaction more human. Because I mean, as you said, for some of these people, all we know is their username and the few comments they've created. So I mean, for all we know, they could be any kind of entity, right? Especially in this day and age. So I think it'll be nice to make them more human if they want to, right? To give the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think I think this approach will also probably be more satisfactory if we also implement these other changes that have been suggested as well. Because so if we're doing more to create certain conversations, for instance, including ones that pertain to research that's being done, and people are participating, for instance, right? Then it's a very natural next step. Like, let's say we start some conversation and someone's really interested, or someone has a question that we think is well put, and one that we'd be happy to answer. And we think that also, sometimes you get these questions where it captures a kind of understanding that is essential to acquire when you're first approaching some question, some topics. So someone will ask a question and you realize, yes, this is something that we haven't explained. This is something that maybe we can try and explain. It'll help the person understand this kind of research more. So if we're doing more to stimulate these conversations, and the conversations go well, and there are people who are chatting about these things, and we want to invite them on and have that kind of discussion, I think that would be good. But that would be my kind of that would be my preference. At the moment, we really don't know what we're going to get by way of. We don't know what kind of questions that we're going to get, and we're not really doing much to try and encourage certain kind of conversations. And in principle, I mean, it is somewhat of a, I don't know, political or ethical question. Like, in principle, people should be able to just ask whatever they want, and they can, and we encourage them. I think, as Łukasz said, somewhat selfishly, we are hoping that there'll be conversations that pertain to the things that we do. And yeah, in principle, it would be fine to have community fora where we talk about, talk about the Japanese economic miracle of the 20th century or whatever. But hopefully we can talk about things that pertain to what we're doing directly. My fear is that if we can't do that, then this whole business of live streaming and open science, et cetera, has failed to some degree. If we, I think the original experiment was, can you do research that's technical in nature and share what you're doing pretty consistently with a general audience and engage? And my rather I think, sober assessment at the moment is that we have not succeeded. You can't just do it and expect it to succeed. You can't just do research and do it live and have a Discord and expect to make a connection. We haven't really made a connection. People are asking us questions about things that we're not discussing regularly in our streams. So
I would say, I would like to comment on that. I mean, I would say that there's two aspects to the open science. I mean, there is the kind of experiment of running a community, and the question that you're posing, which is, can we engage a sort of more general audience with more technical or advanced research? I mean, that's something that I believe it's possible, but it requires a lot of input. It requires a lot of sort of directed action for it to work. You can just expect that because we are talking about the stuff and we are actually doing the research, that people are just going to engage with it. But I would say that the open science approach is very much kind of orthogonal to the question of whether you can engage a general audience with technical stuff. Because the fact that we are doing research and we are basically being transparent about the process, I think that's something that is quite valuable. I mean, we can't really tell that we're doing anything different because that's how we've been running and that's how we operate, and it's been kind of this way. But this is quite different to how things have been for the majority of recent mathematical history or research in general. So I mean, it's something that I would be a bit wary to just dismiss in the sense, or claim that we've kind of partially failed, or it's not fully there, because I think that what we are doing feels like no effort, because we are not really doing any extra effort to be open. But I think it's very ideologically important. Like what we are doing as a way to, we don't really have secrets. I mean, we have our intellect is sort of spilled over our streams and our conversations, and the writings that we put out, and the packages and the functions and everything, right? So in that sense, we are being extremely open in the proper sense, right? In the open science movement sense. And I think it's not monetarily valuable, it's economically not very profitable and all those things, but I think it's very important. I think it's really genuinely important that we are doing it. I mean, if we want to claim that to be a nonprofit trying to make some sort of new form of research work, I think this is one thing that you should keep in your checklist, right? Like we are being open about it. We are, every single step of the way you can sort of reconstruct, because we are leaving a trace, and everyone can trace, who mentioned this idea and what stream, and we're keeping records in this way, right? I mean, this is not common. Almost no institution.
Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah, but I think there's one kind of nuanced wrinkle, caveat, which is, I think in general, the gesture of doing open science is itself of merit, and I don't want to stop doing it. I think it's a good thing to do. And it's one of those things where it's like you're kind of doing it in the open, and you don't know what's going to happen. It's like if we were doing this if we had a booth and we were doing this like in the town square or something, right? It's like maybe no one stops by, maybe many people stop by, but the point is that it's in the open and you can just see what we're doing. Or if we had an institute and all the walls were just glass, it's like maybe some people will peer in, maybe no one will peer in. But the fact is that on our side, in terms of our practice, I think Carlos's point is that you have a choice in terms of the practice that your institute follows, and from our position, we're doing something that we think is right and is novel and is refreshing, and it's open. But there's another question, which is the actual consequences of the openness, because presumably if we're open but we're doing it in the Sahara Desert and no one is stopping in and no one's seeing it, then it's like, yes, it's open, but we're not interacting with anyone. And so I think there's two aspects to openness, and Carlos is identifying one which I hadn't thought about, which is, just the act of doing it in its own right is like we have some choice in terms of how we conduct ourselves. Doing it open in its own right is already a good thing. I'm asking another question though, which is, what are the consequences of doing this openly? And I think that when I say a failure, I mean I think we somewhat failed potentially to realize kind of the potential of doing this openly. I mean, basically the point is we're doing science openly, and we have a Discord and we have community forum. We're trying to interact with people, but people really aren't asking us any questions about things that we've been doing. No one says like, ah, yes, I watched that live stream with Richard, and I have this question about like we don't see anything like that, and we can. In fact, here's another thing, and I'll write this down too. Like we could, it'll take a little bit of work, but if we're consistent, it shouldn't be that much work. Which we could conclude a live stream and summarize what we did on the Discord. Like, hey, we just had this stream, we just did this, blah 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 blah. That's the synopsis. If you want to see more, check out the stream. If you want to know more, you can ask us. We're not really doing that either. And so we're kind of just assuming that people are going to watch these things either synchronously or asynchronously, and they're going to ask us questions about it. And that if they watch stream number 100 and they're like, and they have no idea, what we even mean by spectral theory of hypergraphs, that they're going to go back and they're going to Google things, but that's a lot of labor that we're asking people to do, and they might not have the time. So yeah, if we want there to be some relationship between our community on Discord and through these community fora and the open science that we're doing, and I think that's the point that I'm making, which is that they're rather decoupled from one another. We're gonna have to do more to explain ourselves and invite people to offer questions, and we'll have to create some culture inevitably where we're basically telling people we're working on this thing. It's rather technical. We really welcome people who have the technical background who want to chat with us about this, and we can invite those people to the Discord, etc. But also for people who are just curious about it, want to know the basics. I mean, I don't know about everyone, but I have the patience when I get enough sleep to chat with people about these things in general. Yeah. So if someone has a really basic question, it's always a good check on us. Hopefully we can answer the basic questions. Maybe we'll be more embarrassed than you will if you ask us some elementary thing. We should be able to answer these. So it's a good check on us. So Carlos, what do you think about that? So there's the overall question of the practice, whether or not the practice is itself good, and then there's a question of, well, what are the consequences of it, and how are we actually using this community in order to try to ensure that the open science practice that we have has some short-term consequences. Maybe over the long term, it's like there's an open science movement, and we'll be on some list of people who, early on were doing things out in the open. Maybe we're contributing towards some long-term trend. That's great. But in the short term, we have people who are talking to us. We have a Discord. We do have this. Hopefully we can do something to interface with the community as we do open science. That's the thing that I don't think we're doing really at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the issues is that our audience is highly non-specific. So we have this tension, right? This from the very beginning, we've had the tension between general audience and specialized audience. And I mean, I bet if we went after experts work on Langlands or work on hypermatrices or all these kinds of things and told them, look, we're trying to actively be transparent about this and have more or less regular discussions about these topics and so on, I'm sure that we will be able to grow somewhat active Discord. I mean, I've done this in the past with other topics and, in different communities, and it kind of works. I mean, it's organic. Sometimes it just dies off because people move on and whatever, but I think that will be possible. But in a way, these are all efforts that are kind of pushing in different directions, sort of increasing the area of effect, but they are somewhat linearly independent, right? They are pointing in different directions. So, for example, something like a workshop, like this hypermatrix workshop that we have in the works and all these kinds of things, those to me are equivalent efforts, right? Like they are creating a forum effectively for people to engage with our somehow, under our banner for whatever topics, and come and discuss and further ideas and propose and collaborate and so on. And I see the Discord more like the sort of the town center, it's like where everyone, you can funnel everyone through, and so eventually I don't think there will be much of an issue, in the sense that if everyone wants to keep in touch, then they know that they can be in the Discord, and you get announcements when things are happening, and this is the more organic thing. Like, the problem has been that the Discord has been only advertised generically. Like, I would say that, I don't really know, because we've had like a good couple of dozen people join since we did the initial efforts with completely general internet publicity, right? But so I have no idea where those people come from. I'm sure that they come from tweets and friends and connections and some random networking. But most of the people on the Discord, I imagine, come from the general exposure that we gave the Institute after the launch, and with the campaigns that we did on Reddit and the campaigns that we did on these different social media, right? So in a way, it's a very nondescript population, relatively small and fairly nondescript, right? So I think that issue of having people who engage and constantly come back to this, because there is a core of experts. People were engaging with the content. John is around, and some people are coming and are commenting, and there's some more technically inclined people who are on the Discord, but the vast majority of the population of the Discord, I imagine, is consists of people that are just interested in general in aspects of the Institute, and these younger people talking about interesting stuff. I'm sure I want to check it out every now and then. So it's very general and very nondescript, as I said. And I think that this will change just as a matter of scale. Once we have a longer trajectory and we're sort of incrementing the population, that would naturally account for itself, right? You will have a bigger population of people who just casually wants to engage in community fora and casual conversations, and you'll have some experts that check out, oh yeah, they said something new about hypergraphs or something new about landlines, I want to check this out, and things like that, right? So the problem, I guess, is that if you only see the Discord as the metric, right? Discord population as the only metric, then it can give the impression that that's what was measuring the size of the community. But of course, we are doing these other efforts with contacting people. We have several email exchanges with several parties that are getting in touch with the Institute and so on, right? So I think it's just a matter of keep pushing and keep. So probably one thing that we can do, I'm coming to mind now, that something that we could do more explicitly is use the Discord more as a nexus point. And because we haven't really done that with people who are not on the Discord, right? We at least I haven't had the intuition to immediately say, by the way, if you want to have any more meaningful interaction with us, just go to the Discord, and that's our nexus. That's where you can find ourselves, because that's really where we are. If someone adds us on Discord, we're there. We're going to reply. We're going to interact with them, right? So I would say that could be a sort of a high priority that we. But for that, I think, and this is going back to some of my early suggestions about Discord, I think it should be necessary to organize it a bit better and to have parts that are clearly devoted to discussion, general comments, blah, 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 and then parts which are about research and are about the more technical stuff.
We kind of have channels that are for that, but the technical channels are barren and really underpopulated. But I wanted to, if I understand what you're saying, Carlos, or one interpretation of what you're saying is, sometimes someone will contact us and we'll have a conversation with them that really we could have out in the public, and we're having these conversations like via private emails, when we could just tell people, like, if you want to interact with us, join the Discord and post the question, and we can chat about it, and other people might want to chat about it. No, sometimes someone has some private concern and it's something to do over email. But yes, at some point I say to people, like, and you should join our Discord. But if people contact us and they have things they want to say and they're excited, we should try and we can direct it towards the Discord. And maybe something that we can do that we're not doing right now is, so let's say you meet someone, someone's interested in something specific. You could say, well, we have a channel on the Discord that's about that. And, hopefully over the next like week or so, we can water some of these channels so that they're a little more lively. And if someone is contacting you and they say, "Oh, I'm interested in the Hypermatrix, et cetera," you say, "Well, we have a Hypermatrix channel on our Discord. It'd be great if you posted that question there, and then we can, you can contribute towards that discussion there." Um, that would be very good. Is that what you mean? Like, in terms of we can direct more people to the Discord, but we can also ensure that these respective channels are ready to receive people so that you don't just have to tell people like, because this is part of the problem, which is the Discord, as you're saying, Carlos, all kinds of people are on it, and there are certain parts of the Discord that probably won't be of any interest to certain people. Either it's too technical, or it's not technical enough, or it's about some subject that they don't even like or care about, or et cetera, et cetera. So I guess we need like a lot of landing pads for different kinds of people, and we can tell people when people engage with us, hey, please join the Discord. This will be a good platform on which we can discuss this thing that you're interested in. And there are other people who are like you who have that interest, and so it won't just be you alone chatting with us.
Yeah.
Okay. Here. Now, I don't like to pick on people, but I've noticed Richard hasn't said much, and I know Richard has ideas.
Well, I mean, I don't really have a lot to add. I think a lot has been said, and it's difficult to add anything new to the discussion, really. You did briefly mention my, proposal of like having sort of collaborative work sessions, live streams within the Discord where people can come and work. I think that would be quite cool. You can have multiple people streaming, they can have their notebooks up, and they can be exchanging ideas, pasting functions back and forth between them, and exploring things. So yeah, I would just reiterate that, really, since you touched on it briefly, but I don't have anything else to add to the larger discussion.
Yeah, well, I think those would be fun too. There's nothing stopping anyone from just beginning to do those. That would be good. I think though we should make some measures over the coming, say, week or so to kind of reanimate parts of this Discord, pose questions, share material. Let's try and provoke some conversations and kind of increase the activity. And then if people are checking in more often and we have more people checking in, I think then we could do things that are we can do spontaneous. We can be spontaneous always, but it's more likely to gain traction if people are actually following. And then you can say, you know what, I want to, watch me drink 3 iron brews and work on this thing over the course of a few hours. It would be great to get them as a sponsor. Actually, that would be. But I'm just kidding. That's the kind of thing where I don't want to see anyone kind of go out and say, I'm going to have this live thing, and then no one shows up because we don't have enough activity on the Discord. So okay, so what do we have? We have so we can do more to explain our research, to provide introductory materials, to help stimulate conversations. We can summarize our streams so that we're like, because right now we're just announcing our streams. There's actually not much of a residue of our streams on the Discord itself. If we're constantly saying like, oh, we had this stream, we worked on this, we worked on that. If you have any questions, you want to know more about it, you can watch the video, or if you don't even want to watch the video, you can ask us. That we could do that. We can, once that is better developed, we can actually invite people to join the streams. So like if there's been someone who's been highly active on one of these and on one of these kind of fora that we've begun on Discord, and they have a lot to say about something, and we can invite them and they could actually chat with us. That might be fun for them. It might be fun for us. We can recruit more people who might be interested in specific channels to join those channels and partake in those conversations. We can try and make Discord the kind of default means of communication when appropriate, rather than just sending private emails to people. And once we have more activity, we can actually host live sessions and do things that are more spontaneous. We could hold like book clubs or awards with, prizes that are digital in some way, since we don't have the budget for anything else. But we could do things that are more spontaneous once we have kind of greater activity. Anyway, so I was jotting down notes during this. Those are some things that we've discussed. I think taken together, that's actually a pretty good plan for what to do next.
Yeah, that's very good.
Well, it's basically the top of the hour.
We want to address the other question.
Was it another question from McDougan Bagel?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, does anyone want to take a crack at this at the McDougan Bagel question? I'm sure, Richard, there's probably a way to, there's probably a slightly more technical way to address this Rulio question from the point of view of your research project, for instance.
Is this let me just find the exact question. I'm just looking.
It's just under comments, questions.
Comments, questions. And it's where?
It's just the second second most recent. It's just right before.
I see Jonathan is or in our private Discord.
Yeah. It's just the second most recent thing.
Oh, second. Oh, sorry. So many names on Discord.
The person's picture is not a bagel. It's kind of confusing. I think it's like a cherry or a lollipop or something. You see it?
Mm-hmm. I do, and I read it before. I'm just going over it again. Let's see. What can an observer decisively do to shift their own worldview? I mean, my interpretation of that is it's just to do with selection of which rules, and then some kind of topology on the rules is necessary, which is a point I've brought up, in the past. And I'm not really sure what people think about that, but it's that there is some sort of spatialization of Rulio space that's possible if we start thinking about sort of rewrite dynamics on the rules themselves. But in terms of an observer, let's see. I mean, like, what do we consider a reference frame to be, regardless of it being Rulio or not? And then let's add the Rulio component. Is there a sort of unique or strong definition of what a Rulio reference frame even is? I don't know. Maybe some of us know.
I don't think there is. I mean, my own pretty conservative take on this is I think the notion of, just to demystify this notion of what we mean by Rulio. I mean, so what Richard is working on is you can consider all kinds of different formal systems. You can consider different rules or algorithms that when run lead to different kinds of computations. And you can parameterize a space. You can create a space that parameterizes these computations. In our case, we're doing it according to the causal graph. So yes, in this case, like at every point along this space, in principle, you should have a computation that's distinct from one other one and is closest to those between which there is some sort of minimal cost edit distance from one of these causal graphs to another. So you can imagine, in principle, if you were to kind of transport over this space, the computation would be varying ever so slightly. I think that this is, in its own right, in terms of the study of computation, is interesting. And I think that mathematical techniques can and are being used to better make this notion more precise. However, the question of whether or not there are actual this can be used to describe something like an observer is a completely different point. I one thing that I worry about is that this delves into kind of Lovecraftian or otherwise kind of transcendental territory where it's like, you're an observer, you yourself are performing kind of computations. What if I mean, to some extent, I do think that it's not irrelevant to things like landscape theories or et cetera, like but so there's some kind of physical way you could think about it, but this idea of actually transporting across rulal space,
Yeah.
and as you're transporting, like underlying laws of like physics are changing, or there's different kind of mathematics. I mean, like
Well,
we know people, for instance, our friends at Metaverse are interested in like trying to create, simulations of this kind of thing. They think that there could be some educational value in trying to, teach people to think about how you could toggle these rules and how things could change. It could work for immersive environments. It could work for VR. I think that in its own right, it's helped the study of computation. But I mean, just other people can disagree. I'm going to make the claim that like I'm I'm not going to support the claim that this is something that's real in the sense that we are living in some like it's real space is something that like we can actually access, and if you perform the right techniques, you yourself are going to transport over real space. I think it's an interesting model. It's like kind of the highest order model that you can think of, but I'm not gonna, the idea of there being a rule observer, what makes me nervous about it is that it's taking a concept that's usually used in physics. And so as soon as you describe a rule observer, it kind of presumes that this is something that is in a physical theory. And it's more of a maybe it belongs in some I mean, I think it's appropriate for some higher level study of computation. I think it's interesting for studying computation. Um, but I hesitate to actually comment in any serious way on the idea of there really being rule observers. Because I think for the most part, people are interested in rule observers because they're interested in this idea of like, well, could you be an observer who's moving across rule space and everything is changing, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, I mean, in principle, mathematically, you could conceptualize transport across some space that parameterizes computation. But just because you can conceptualize something mathematically doesn't mean it has anything to do with the world. So
and there's too many
I
choices because it's like, do you stay at one place in real space and do a few updates in the within your system and then like do you do 5 updates and then move in rulio space, or I mean it's kind of arbitrary. So yeah, or and is your trajectory through rulio space, is it are you always moving in new directions, or is there some kind of recurrence? Do you come back, do you revisit points in rulio space repeatedly? Or are we talking about kind of always moving and never getting back to the place where you're at? Another thing I had thought of before was, in the sort of infinite limit idea of things, that there's some kind of like, there's some notion of like rule application probability rather than taking some subset of all possible rules. It's more that one can think of applying rules in this probabilistic language, but yeah, I don't think there's enough time to really discuss it at length. But I'll just briefly mention that it was a thought or idea that I had.
Yeah. So, I think that this conversation is an example of, there is some work that we're doing on trying to formalize modularized spaces of computations, because we do have a sponsor, Metaverse, who's kind of interested in some of these ideas that Stephen has put forward in very kind of loose speculative form, and we're trying to examine like is there anything concrete to be said about it. And I think there is on a kind of a formal technical level. I think that the idea could be realized kind of technologically through the kind of stuff that Metaverse is doing. But the idea is intriguing. There's no reason to presume that there's an actual theory of rulio observers or rulio motion, et cetera, et cetera. Now, maybe someone will have a counter argument. Maybe on a very subtle level, you could imagine something, but there's really no theory that's really been developed. And personally, I think this idea of spatially parameterizing computations is very interesting. I think that it could help the overall theory of constructivism. And right now, the focus is just seeing to what extent we can even do that. And as Richard and I are finding, even spatial parameterization of computations in their own right is no small task. I mean, you can kind of just say like you have this space and the space is all these different algorithms. Good, but as soon as you actually try and make it precise, it's quite difficult. And we're not sure what this space will look like. It could be the case that, especially once you look at computations in the limit, I mean, we don't know yet. Over the next, like, say, 2 months or so, we really want to nail this down. It could be the case that the space itself in the limit is rather trivial because many of these things are limiting to like empty or uniform graphons. We don't actually know yet.
Well, in terms of like Rullion, if you come up with some canonicalization which lays out sort of every possible rule and you can assign a natural to it or something, sure, but that's not very interesting. That doesn't give you, a space per se. It just gives you some line, and you can just pick arbitrary points in that line, or maybe move, in 2 directions. But yeah, I mean, when I started thinking down this line, it was really prompted by this, and I've mentioned it before, but it's that autodidactic universe paper, and sort of any idea where you might think about the universe sort of learning its own laws. So I mean, and it's more of a kind of philosophical thing, really, rather than something that's formal. So it's like, if we're to take this idea interesting and try and incorporate it into Wolfram physics, then we might want to think about observers, which, and again, this is why I sort of brought up this inductive logic programming framework, because it's an area where, given some observations, we can construct some rules which attempt to sort of explain those observations. And I kind of like that idea, or I would like to explore that idea within this sort of like rewriting physics context, where you could have some physical observer, he observes some things, and then sort of updates where he is in Rulio space in order to sort of compress those observations, right? So that from his viewpoint, they can happen with sort of fewer number of evolution steps, something like that.
Does it mean you're viewing some data, and with time you're trying to inductively infer like what's the actual rewrite rule that would give us this data? But then if we have a space that's parameterized over these different rewrite rules, then actually you could kind of spatialize this induction in terms of identifying a point, or maybe under less confidence, a kind of a region, where instead of saying, I know the rule that gives me this data, you're saying, I know the general neighborhood on this, space.
You're constraining, you're sort of constraining, the possible points in Rulio space that may explain the data. I mean, one way that it's done.
That's nice.
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
cool. I mean that.
Yeah, the way it's done in inductive logic programming is I mean, formally is like they use non-deterministic Turing machines in the theoretical construction of this, where what they're doing, and there's a nice slide that I had copied, and I'll put it in our Discord. I'll find it again. It's, so you have your examples, and you must have some meta rules. So what you do is you substitute your observations into these meta rules non-deterministically, because you have a lot of different choices you could make. And then you end up with this kind of branching of multiple different Turing machines who have updated their tapes in different ways in response to their observations. So in some sense, you're exploring hypothesis space. You're attempting to kind of explain the data, in in as few number of rules that explains the data, as many of the observations that you've seen. So yeah, there may be some interesting connections to explore with that.
That's interesting. That sounds like an actual use case for this object that we've created, which so far has been without a definitive use case other than just trying to make a certain kind of general notion precise.
Mm-hmm. But you need the thing is you need meta rules, and they actually go like meta with this in the set. There's a sort of set of publications in this area. Stephen Muggleton, his name is, and his collaborators, and yeah, they actually use this inductive logic framework to learn the meta rules themselves. So you have this idea that you can kind of induce meta rules, which you then use within an inductive logic system below. And who's to say you can't have some sort of like infinite stack of these meta rule generating systems which are sort of influencing each other in some sort of turtles all the way down situation. But I don't know, it gets a bit funny after that, but I think there's something there.
Well, I think this was a pretty good response to McDougal-Bagel's comment. I can see that Carlos and Łukasz and Nick are kind of squirming around a little bit. So, well, we've gone past the hour. Hey, I personally found this to be a nice kind of frank conversation about what to do community-wise. I think the fact that we did it openly, besides it being kind of a show about a show, et cetera, et cetera. I think that this was actually quite. I mean, basically, doing things live puts pressure on you to be, to basically come up with some ideas. So this was good. We'll start implementing these, and yeah, thanks for these suggestions and input, everyone. Yeah, this was really nice. I don't know what happened to Łukasz. He was like adjusting his camera, and then and now there's just nothing. Łukasz, are you still there? Well, I guess we're gonna wrap anyway. So thank you, everyone, and you can expect to hear from us on the Discord in new ways now, given this discussion. Anyway, this was good. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.
Yep.
Cheerio.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.